Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics and the wider Horn of Africa region. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on Horford Media alongside Suleiman Hashi. On this week's program, following the election of Hassan Sheikh Mohamud as the 10th president of Somalia, the US government has announced the deployment of 700 US troops to the nation. The decision by Joe Biden to reverse the previous decision made by former President Donald Trump has shocked many. So why has the US decided to send troops to Somalia now? And what is the significance of this to the political Cold War that is unfolding in the region as China makes a series of moves that have raised US eyebrows? That is the topic on the program today. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to Horford Media. Also subscribe to Horford Media Group's second channel known as Horford TV, where you can find exclusive programs such as Mahahi Saleh, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider Horford Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into it. Now, to understand why the US is expressing interest in Somalia, one has to understand both the geographical and military significance regarding the positioning of Somalia on the world map. Now, to the north of Somalia is Bab el-Mandeb and the Gulf of Aden. Indeed, Somalia is positioned at the entrance of the Red Sea, essentially acting as a gatekeeper for the world economy, as millions of barrels of oil travel through this body of water to reach Europe and beyond. For a millennia, merchants and empires from Asia traveled through Somali waters on their way to the Sinai Peninsula on towards Europe. As many as 51 ships passed through the Red Sea per day in 2021, which is roughly 18,615 per year. That was last year. The Gulf of Aden is also of significant importance to this trade. The ancient Greeks regarded the Gulf as one of the most important parts of the ancient Erythraean Sea. From the late 1960s onwards, the region was dominated by the Soviet Union, with an increased presence of Soviet naval forces across the Gulf. In the modern era, the waterway, much like the Red Sea, is an important Suez Canal shipping route between the Mediterranean Sea and the Arabian Sea in the Indian Ocean. The route is often used for the delivery of Persian Gulf oil, making the Gulf an integral waterway in the world economy. Just to highlight the significance of Persian Gulf oil to the world economy, a staggering 18.2 million barrels of oil are produced per day, with approximately 17 million barrels per day transiting through the Strait of Hormuz in tankers. Indeed, 3 conflicts have been fought surrounding the Persian Gulf region, including 2 wars in Iraq, as well as a war in Afghanistan. Now, some might be surprised that I've mentioned these conflicts, despite the MO of these conflicts being explained as otherwise. The reality is that both Iraq and Afghanistan, alongside Iran, are strategically important countries to the trade of Persian Gulf oil and the region. So therefore, whether aforementioned factors of oil have played any role in the intention of these conflicts that I'm talking about is for history and historians to decide. Irrespective, however, Somalia is at the gate that connects the producers with the customers in Europe and beyond. So the importance of a Somali government that is closely allied with the US is of very important significance to the US government. Now, to the east and southeast, Somalia has the longest African coastline with the Indian Ocean. Here, Somalia possesses untouched billions of barrels of oil, as well as one of the most diverse and rich fishing waters in the world. Take, for example, Somalia's ICJ battle with Kenya. This demonstrates the wealth Somalia possesses, as the Nairobi regime attempted to illegally claim Somali waters, signing oil deals with major Norwegian oil companies, among other things. We can also look at the large-scale illegal fishing crisis that has been ongoing in Somalia for decades, with accusations against countries like Iran and Vietnam of illegally fishing in Somali waters. It's clear that many countries are battling for Somalia's resources. As a result, Somalia is of great geographical significance not just to world powers such as China and the US, but is also of significance to regional powers that wish to exercise more control in the region. Take the United Arab Emirates, for example, or the UAE. It currently controls the port of Berbera and Bosaso. Now, if we wonder as to why the UAE is striving to seek control of these ports, we must look at 2 elements. One, Due to the vast number of ships traveling past Somali waters, having state-of-the-art port facilities in Somalia would be financially beneficial, as potentially thousands of ships would use these ports for refueling, among other things. And this would increase business and financial gains, of course. And secondly, we must look at events unfolding across the pond in Yemen. The GCC-led coalition has been involved in a grueling proxy war in Yemen against Iran, which has continued for 7 years now. So therefore, it is important to the UAE, to Saudi Arabia, to the GCC to have more military bases in the region to counter this Cold War that's going on in the Middle East, and that has been going on not just in Yemen against Iran, but also we see a proxy war going on in Syria. We see a somewhat proxy Cold War going on in Iraq. So it is important for a country like the UAE to seek bases in Somalia, which are in a strategic location to the Middle East. So now the question becomes, why has the US randomly showed a keen interest in Somalia today? Well, the Horn of Africa has become a significant region for the globe, as all eyes turn to events unfolding in Somalia and in Ethiopia over the last year. To understand this growing spotlight, we must zoom out of Somalia and Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa and actually look at the geopolitics of the region. Tensions between China and the US have been growing in recent months within the Horn of Africa region as a wind of political change sweeps the region. Conflict in Ethiopia saw the old Ethiopia clash with the new. TPLF, the former masters of Ethiopia, entered into a grueling war with a newly re-elected Ethiopian coalition led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The conflict saw the world divided into East and West, as the US and her allies gave support to TPLF, whereas Chinese and its allies gave support to Addis Ababa, with even the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi visiting Ethiopia to showcase Beijing's support for Prime Minister Ahmed. Similarly, in Sudan, we saw a coup that toppled former dictator Omar al-Bashir, establishing a civilian government led by Abdullah Hamdok, only to be overthrown by the Sudanese military led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in October 2021. Now, despite the fact that an agreement was reached due to the mounting internal and international pressure, it has been rejected by many civil rights groups in Sudan. Sudan, and much like many countries in the Horn of Africa, remains at a crossroad as the nation grapples with its future. Now, the Chinese recently established a new Horn of Africa Special Envoy to directly challenge the US Horn of Africa Special Envoy. Ambassador Zhu Bing already made an official trip to Mogadishu, where he met with federal government officials, and this was during a time in which Somaliland authorities visited the US, with some US lawmakers pushing for recognition of Somaliland in exchange for a new base in the region. Similarly, we see separatist authorities in Hargeisa working closely with Chinese separatists in Taiwan, a trend that has angered both China and Somalia, but is being capitalized by the United States. Consequently, one can evidently see that the issue of Somalia plays into a bigger conflict between the Chinese and the Americans. There is a changing geopolitical dynamic in the Horn of Africa. Its strategic location means that any changes to the status quo worries the US, as it could be seen as a Chinese opportunity to capitalize and counter US influence. The Chinese government has already made a major military base in Djibouti, but it's also reported that the Chinese are interested in setting up another base in the region. Now, while in an interview with Somalian media, the Chinese ambassador to Somalia denied any intention by Beijing to set up a base in Somalia, it seems to worry the US administration, to say the least. Now, the US and the West in general are worried about the continued influence of the Chinese government had in Africa, particularly with African governments supporting infrastructure and providing loans. And for Western states, Chinese influence will only weaken Western influence in the continent, which has been the norm for centuries. So what next for US-Somali relations? The newly elected Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has welcomed the decision by Joe Biden to deploy US troops in Somalia. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud has previously worked with the Obama administration, an administration in which Joe Biden served as the vice president. Therefore, relations between the current administration led by Joe Biden and the administration led by Hassan Sheikh Mohamud are going to be, of course, friendly, to say the least, as history remains between them, including, for example, the establishment of Den of Special Forces, among other security partnerships. The US ambassador to Somalia, Larry Andre, accompanied by the General Townsend of the US AFRICOM, visited Hargeisa last week, in which the US delegation visited Berbera port via air. While the US expressed keen interest in working with Somaliland, possibly even establishing relations. It seems as though that the US maintains that it recognizes Somaliland as part of the Federal Republic of Somalia under its single Somalia policy. Now, that same delegation also met with Somali President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud in Mogadishu shortly after his election last week. Now, some might perceive this as the US playing both sides in an attempt to pressure Mogadishu and deter the federal government from working more closely with the Chinese and possibly even setting up a Chinese base in Somalia, much like Turkey has. However, what we can see is that Hassan Sheikh is very different to President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. Hassan Sheikh has a stronger relationship with the US. Hassan Sheikh has a stronger relationship with the President Joe Biden of the US, as both administrations worked closely during the Obama administration between 2012 and 2016. Now, what this indicates is that there's definitely going to be a significant change in Somali foreign policy. Will this mean that the Somalis will work more closely with the US and pick a side? We don't know. Will this mean that the Somalis will work with both sides? We don't know. But what remains important is for Somalia not to pick any sides. Irrespective of interest, both China and the US place their own interests first, and Somalia must do the same. And much like we've seen under the Farmajo administration, the Mohamud administration must continue to play both sides to maximize the benefits for Somalia, whether this is at the UN Security Council or whether it concerns regional politics. Somalia must not pick sides. It had made that mistake during the Cold War under the presidency of General Mohammed Siad Barre, but we cannot do the same mistake again.